Snow whispered across Hollow Creek like breath over a dying flame. The land was white, endless, and mercilessly still, a silence so thick it pressed against the chest like grief. Wind rolled down from the ridges, brushing against the pine tops, scattering flurries that glimmered under a dim, pewter sky. The valley had been asleep since December, its rivers locked under ice, its cabins shuttered, smoke thin and scarce. Winter here wasn't a season. It was a trial. Elias Redhawk stood outside his cabin as dusk bruised the horizon, a tall, broad man whose hair had turned the same color as the frost that rimed his beard. He leaned on his axe, breath clouding before him, watching the snow fall over the graves on the hill behind his home. 3 small wooden markers, names long weathered away, rose from the whiteness like stubborn ghosts. He didn't speak to them anymore. Not aloud. Words had stopped meaning much after war took one son and sickness took the rest. The door of his cabin creaked behind him, a hinge complaining in the cold. No sound ever came up that path. Not in winter. He turned, squinting through the wind. 2 shapes emerged from the veil of snow, one tall, one small, both moving with the hesitant rhythm of exhaustion. A woman and a boy. She was bundled in a faded shawl, her boots sunk deep into drifts, her face red from cold but marked by a kind of grace that even hunger couldn't dull. When she reached the porch, she paused, gathered her courage, and knocked. The sound echoed strange and hollow in that lonely place. "I was told you need a cook," she said. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from the raw edge of wind cutting her throat. Elias didn't answer at once. He looked past her, at the boy behind her, maybe 12, thin, wrapped in a coat too large, his eyes too sharp for his years. The sight held him still. Something old and painful stirred. After a long silence, Elias nodded once and pushed the door open wider. The woman hesitated, then guided her son inside. Heat from the hearth kissed her face, the scent of wood smoke and pine filled the air. The boy hovered near the wall, clutching his cap, eyes wide at the cabin's plainness. A bed, a table, a rifle mounted above the door, and the steady orange pulse of firelight. Elias shut the door and set his axe against the wall. "You can stay till the weather breaks," he said finally, his voice gravel-thick and used to speech. "Work for food. No promises after that." She nodded, grateful but guarded. "That's fair. My name's Mary Ann Thorne. This is my boy Luke." Elias didn't offer his name. He simply gestured toward the pot by the fire. "There's stew." They ate in silence. Mary Ann's fingers shook as she brought the spoon to her lips. Luke devoured his bowl with desperate haste. Elias watched without expression. He'd seen hunger before. It never shocked him anymore, just reminded him that living came at a cost. When the boy was done, he thanked Elias quietly. The Apache's face softened for the briefest flicker, then hardened again. Outside, the wind began to rise. Snow beat against the windows like soft fists. Mary Ann turned toward the sound. "It's heavier than I thought. We barely made it from town." Elias grunted. "Storm will last 2, maybe 3 days? You were foolish to come through it." Her chin lifted a little, pride beneath fatigue. "We didn't have much choice." He understood. He'd seen that kind of edge before, the look of someone who'd run out of places to go. Later, when the storm thickened into white blindness, Elias brought in more wood. He worked wordlessly while Mary Ann set the cabin in order. She cleaned the pot, wiped the table, spread their threadbare blanket near the fire for Luke. The boy fell asleep almost instantly, curled beneath his coat. The firelight shifted across Mary Ann's face as she sat near it, her eyes reflecting orange and gold. "You live here alone?" she asked softly. Elias nodded. "No wife? No family?" He kept stacking logs. "Once." Something in the way he said it told her not to ask more. Hours passed. The storm moaned outside, the kind of sound that made the lonely feel smaller. Mary Ann's eyelids fluttered, heavy from warmth, but her thoughts stayed restless. The man across from her was unlike any she'd met, silent as a mountain, yet there was sorrow in him that spoke louder than words. She wondered what it would be like to carry grief that deep and still choose to live with it. Sometime past midnight, she stirred and saw him still awake, sitting by the fire, mending a leather strap with slow, deliberate movements. He looked up, meeting her gaze for a heartbeat. Something passed between them, not trust, not yet, but a faint recognition of 2 people who'd both lost more than they could name. The next morning, light bled pale through the frost on the windows. The storm had buried the path. Mary Ann rose early and tried to start a fire, fumbling with the flint. Before she could strike again, Elias's hand appeared, steady and sure, lighting the flame with one clean motion. "Don't waste the sparks," he muttered. "I wasn't," she replied, but her smile betrayed her. He studied her for a moment, not as a man studies a woman, but as one survivor measures another. You work careful, he said finally. That's good. I've had to. Luke woke coughing. The air was dry, harsh. Marianne hurried to him, rubbing his back. Elias watched, then stood and reached for a small tin from the shelf. He poured a dark liquid into a cup and handed it over. Willow bark. Helps the lungs. Marianne hesitated, surprised. Thank you. He didn't answer. That evening, as the wind quieted, she ventured outside for the first time. The world was still, the snow untouched except for the trail of her boots. From the hill she could see Hollow Creek below, the frozen water glinting faintly in the fading light, the distant smoke from the town curling up like frail prayers. She thought of the whispers that would have followed her there. A widow and her boy staying with an Apache. The thought stung, but the cold wind took it from her lips. When she returned, Elias was sitting by the fire, humming something low and ancient. The sound made her pause in the doorway. It wasn't a song she knew, but it felt like grief turned into music, deep, steady, worn smooth by time. She stepped closer. That song, who's it for? He didn't look up. My son. I didn't know you had one. He stopped humming. You wouldn't? He's been gone longer than the world remembers. The words hung heavy. Marianne sat down across from him, the fire snapping softly between them. Luke stirred in his sleep, murmuring something she couldn't hear. Elias's eyes were fixed on the flames. He died before the snow that year. Buried him near the river. Every winter since, I hear him when the wind moves through the pines. She swallowed, her throat tight. I'm sorry. He nodded once. Don't be. The world takes what it wants. What matters is what we do after. The fire cracked, sending up a brief shower of sparks. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Marianne whispered, You still light a fire. That counts for something. A faint smile ghosted across his face, the first she'd seen. Maybe. Outside the storm began to ease. The wind died, leaving a fragile hush. Marianne felt warmth not from the fire, but from the simple truth of being allowed inside a stranger's silence. She looked at the sleeping boy, then back at Elias. You said I could stay till the weather breaks, she murmured. But maybe I could stay until you tell me when it does. He glanced at her, eyes unreadable, then turned toward the window where the snow drifted softly in the fading light. The weather never really breaks here, he said quietly. It just changes its shape. For the first time since her husband's death, Marianne felt the faintest pulse of safety, not comfort, not yet, but the possibility of it. Elias rose, added another log to the fire, and went to the door. He opened it just enough for the night air to slip in, cold, sharp, and full of something that might have been memory. Across the valley, through the blur of snow, a shadow moved, a horseman riding slow along the ridge. Elias's shoulders tensed. He watched the figure vanish behind the trees, his hand drifting toward the rifle on the wall. He shut the door softly. Storm's not the only thing coming, he said. The firelight trembled against his face, and for the first time Marianne saw fear there, not of weather but of the past. The snow did not melt so much as it learned to breathe again. It thinned beneath the sun's slow hand, bearing patches of frozen earth where grass slept like secrets. Each morning brought the sound of dripping water, hesitant and alive, sliding from the eaves of the cabin. The air carried a faint scent of thawing pine and smoke, the promise of something that might one day resemble spring. Marianne Thorne woke before dawn now. She had learned the rhythm of this quiet place, the way the wind shifted before it snowed again, the way Elias Red Hawk moved with the weather, as if both man and land obeyed the same invisible will. He rose before light, fed the fire, and worked without sound. His presence filled the cabin without demanding attention, like gravity, unseen but constant. Luke had taken to following him everywhere. At first Elias ignored him, but the boy's persistence was stubborn as the thaw. He asked about everything, the flintlock rifle, the carving on the doorframe, the beads around Elias's wrist. You make these? Luke had asked one morning. Elias paused his work. Long ago. They're pretty, the boy said, running his fingers over them. Pretty doesn't mean safe, Elias replied, though there was no sharpness in his tone, only memory. Marianne watched from the doorway, her hands wrapped around a tin mug. The sight of her son laughing again after so many months of silence loosened something inside her chest. The sound filled the cabin in ways warmth never could. Still, each time Elias looked at the boy, there was that flicker in his eyes, a ghost she did not understand. The valley meanwhile began to stir. The first wagon tracks cut through the snow, and word from Hollow Creek drifted up the mountain with the traders who came seeking hides or firewood. Marianne went down twice that month for supplies, and both times she felt their stares. Men paused mid-conversation, women whispered behind their gloves. "Widow Thorne living with the Apache up the ridge," one said. "God help her. And that boy. She always did pick trouble." Their words clung to her even as she turned away. Shame was an old ache, one she thought she'd buried with her husband, but gossip has a way of finding the tender places. She didn't tell Elias about it, but that night she chopped wood until her hands blistered. He came out silently, watching her shoulders tremble with each swing. "You'll break more than wood doing it that way," he said. She dropped the axe, her breath fogging. "You think I care?" He stepped closer, voice calm but firm. "You came here for work, not war." Her anger faltered. Beneath it was exhaustion, and beneath that, fear. "You don't know what they're saying down there." "I don't need to," he replied. "The wind carries gossip better than truth." She turned away, her throat tight. "Then maybe I should go before the thaw. Before it gets worse." Elias said nothing for a long time. Then softly, "You'll do what you think right. But the road's crueler than tongues." His words sank into her like stones into water, slow, inevitable. That night, after Luke had fallen asleep, Marianne sat by the fire, mending a tear in her son's coat. Elias worked near the window, scraping frost from the glass. The silence between them was no longer cold, it held weight, like the pause between verses of an old song. "Do you ever wish things could be different?" she asked suddenly, her eyes still on the coat. He didn't turn. "Every man does. The wise ones stop wishing." "And you?" "I stopped long ago." She smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. "That sounds like a lie." He looked at her then, the firelight flickering over his face. "Maybe it is." The days followed a pattern after that, slow, quiet, threaded with a rhythm that felt almost domestic. Marianne cooked, Elias repaired what winter had broken, and Luke filled the space between them with laughter and questions. The air grew softer. Even the light seemed to change, shifting from silver to gold. One afternoon, Luke coaxed Elias into showing him how to track deer prints along the creek. Marianne watched from the ridge, their figures small against the expanse of white and pine. There was something sacred in it, the sight of her son walking beside the man everyone else feared. She realized she was breathing easier now, no longer counting the days until she could leave. But peace in Hollow Creek was fragile. It always was. The next trip to town brought new eyes, sharper tongues. As Marianne waited for flour at the general store, a shadow fell across the counter. A tall man in a brown coat stood beside her, his badge glinting beneath his lapel. Sheriff Cal Denton, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who wore authority like armor. "Mrs. Thorne," he said. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." She stiffened. "I didn't expect to be." He nodded toward her sack of flour. "You staying with Red Hawk, folks say?" She hesitated. "He gave us shelter. That's all." His tone turned careful, too casual. "You know what he's done?" Her jaw tightened. "I know he's been kind." Denton leaned closer. "Kind doesn't erase blood. Red Hawk's no simple trapper. He fought in the raids, led one near Fort Yuma 15 years ago. Folks died, Mrs. Thorne. Settlers. A boy not much older than yours." Her fingers froze around the flour bag. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you've got a child," he said, lowering his voice. "And because some ghosts don't stay buried in snow." She left the store without a word, heart pounding. The ride back up the ridge felt longer than ever, the silence pressing on her ears like a storm waiting to break. When she reached the cabin, Elias was outside chopping wood. His movements were steady, sure, but there was a stillness to him that felt different now, like a man waiting for judgment. Marianne dismounted, her hands trembling as she tied the horse. "Who were you before this?" she asked, her voice tight. He paused mid-swing. "A man who fought too long and lost too much." "Did you kill them?" He didn't look at her. "Yes." The axe sank into the stump with a hollow sound. For a moment, all she heard was her own breathing. "My husband's brother was at Fort Yuma," she said quietly. "He never came home." Elias lifted his gaze. The truth hung between them, heavy as the sky before snow. "I know," he said. Her hand flew to her mouth, a sound escaping, part sob, part disbelief. She turned and walked away, stumbling through the snow, needing distance, air, anything but his silence. That night the cabin felt smaller than ever. Luke sensed the tension, though he didn't understand it. He asked why his mother's eyes were red, Why Elias stayed outside long after dark. Neither answered. The fire burned low, its light flickering against walls that suddenly seemed foreign. When Luke finally slept, Marianne sat alone watching the flames. Every kindness Elias had shown her replayed in her mind, every quiet gesture, every wordless act of care, and they warred against the image the sheriff had painted. Could both truths exist in one man? The wind rose again, carrying whispers through the cracks. Outside, snow began to fall, a slow, steady curtain. Near dawn she heard footsteps on the porch. The door opened softly. Elias entered, his face pale beneath the dim glow. "You should take the boy and go," he said. Her breath caught. "You want us gone?" "I want you safe." "From you?" He hesitated. "From what follows me." Something in his voice broke the anger inside her. Beneath it was a man stripped bare, guilt, grief, something close to resignation. "I don't understand," she whispered. He looked at her, and for once there was no mask, no armor. "There are men who'll never forgive what I did. They won't forgive that I'm still breathing. And they've seen your tracks in my snow." Her throat closed. "Then we'll face them together." He shook his head. "The storm you saw wasn't the last one. The next will have guns." She wanted to argue, to call him wrong, but something in his eyes, steady, sorrowful, certain, silenced her. Outside, the snow thickened again, covering the old tracks, erasing the path down the ridge. Elias turned to the window, his reflection flickering in the glass like a ghost. "The thaw's coming late this year," he said quietly. "And when it comes, it'll bring more than spring." Behind him, the first crack of thunder rolled across the valley, though the sky held no lightning, only snow, endless and white, falling over Hollow Creek like a warning. The thaw came slow and uncertain, like forgiveness. The snow retreated inch by inch, revealing black soil and broken branches, the bones of winter laid bare. Streams bled through the white crust, carrying bits of ash and bark down to the river. The world seemed to inhale again, though the air still carried the bite of old cold. Marianne watched it all from the porch, her shawl drawn tight. The sound of water breaking through ice should have been a relief, but to her it only sounded like something cracking open that was better left sealed. Elias was quieter than before, though she hadn't thought that possible. He spent his days near the creek, mending traps, repairing fences, and looking out toward the ridge as if expecting something to appear there. He spoke to Luke when needed, offering calm instruction, but there was distance in his eyes now, something locked behind the weight of what had been said. Marianne tried to hate him. She told herself to remember every whisper from Hollow Creek, every cold glance from the townsfolk. Yet when she saw him kneel beside Luke to show him how to knot a fishing line, his big hands moving carefully, his voice gentle, her anger betrayed her. Hatred required certainty, and hers had begun to thaw just like the snow. She worked harder to drown the noise in her head, scrubbing, sewing, hauling water until her arms ached. Elias never stopped her, never offered comfort or correction. Once, when she cut her palm on a broken mug, he reached for her hand instinctively. She pulled back, the movement too sharp. He froze, then simply nodded and turned away. That night she dreamed of fire, bright, roaring, devouring the plains. In the dream she saw Elias not as he was now but younger, wild-eyed, his face painted with soot and grief, standing over a field of smoke. She woke with the taste of ash in her mouth. 2 days later, the dream found its echo in the real world. Luke came running from the ridge, breathless. "Riders," he shouted. 3 of them, maybe 4. Down by the bend. Elias looked up from his work, his expression unreadable. "What colors?" "Brown coats," Luke said. "One with a badge." The air tightened. Marianne's stomach turned cold. "The sheriff?" "Likely," Elias said, voice low. "And others." He stood, dusted the dirt from his hands and took a long look toward the tree line. "Get the boy inside." Marianne grabbed Luke's shoulders. "What do they want?" Elias didn't answer. He went to the cabin, lifted the old rifle from the wall, checked the chamber. His movements were measured, precise, neither hurried nor hesitant. He'd done this before, too many times. By the time the riders appeared on the trail, the sun was bleeding low behind them, turning their shapes into shadows framed in gold. Sheriff Denton led the way, his face carved from stone, the badge on his chest catching light like a blade. The 2 men behind him wore the look of hired hands, hard, lean, silent. "Red Hawk," the sheriff called as they drew close. "You and I need words." Elias stepped forward, rifle held but not raised. "You brought company for words?" "Depends on how you answer." Marianne stood in the doorway, Luke clutching her skirt. The boy's eyes were wide, flicking between the men like he could sense the danger pressing in. Denton dismounted, boots sinking into the wet earth. "You know what this is about." "I do," Elias said. "But that's old blood." "Old blood doesn't stay buried," the sheriff said. "Not when it cries for justice." Elias's jaw tightened. "Justice?" He nodded toward the hired men. "That what you call this?" Denton's voice softened, almost sorrowful. "You should have left this valley. There's folks down south still carrying your sins." Marianne stepped forward before she could think better of it. "He's saved lives here. He saved my boys." The sheriff looked at her, pity shadowing his eyes. "Ma'am, I don't doubt it. But a man can do 1,000 good things and still owe for one bad one." Luke's voice broke the silence. "He's not bad." Denton's gaze shifted to the boy and something in it cracked. "I once said that about a man too. Then I buried my brother." The air held still. Elias's hand clenched around the rifle, though he didn't lift it. "You came to end this," he said quietly. "Then end it. I won't hide." The sheriff exhaled, long and heavy. "No one needs to die, Red Hawk. Come with us, stand trial. Maybe they'll listen." Elias smiled faintly, a tired, knowing smile. "They won't." Before Denton could reply, thunder rolled from the ridge, not sky thunder but the crack of a rifle. A bullet hit the dirt near Elias's boot. The two hired men drew their guns, shouting. Chaos exploded into motion. Elias pulled Marianne and Luke behind the woodpile, shouting, "Stay down." Another shot rang out, splintering the porch rail. The air filled with smoke and echo. Denton turned furious. "Hold your fire." But the command was lost to the wind. One of the gunmen reloaded, crouched, and aimed again. Elias moved before thought, his rifle snapping up, the shot clean and final. The man fell. The other bolted for cover. Denton raised his revolver but didn't shoot, torn between law and mercy. "Stop," he bellowed. "Enough." Silence answered. Only the wind and the far-off river spoke now. Marianne's heart hammered. Luke clung to her, sobbing. Elias stood a few paces away, shoulders heaving, the rifle still warm in his hands. He stared at the fallen man with an expression that wasn't victory or regret, just inevitability. Denton's voice trembled when he spoke again. "You've done it now." Elias looked up, weary. "It was done long before today." The sheriff holstered his weapon. "You'll have to run. You know that." Elias nodded. "I know." He turned toward Marianne, and in his eyes she saw the truth. He hadn't fought to survive, he'd fought to give them a chance. "Take the boy," he said. "Go north through the pass. They won't follow in the dark." "No," she said, stepping closer. "I won't leave you." "You will." His tone was calm, final. "You're not meant to bury another man's war." Her hands trembled. "Elias." He reached out then, fingers brushing her cheek in a gesture so gentle it undid her. "You gave this place laughter again. Don't let it die here." She caught his wrist, desperate. "Come with us." He hesitated, eyes full of something that felt like longing and surrender all at once. "There's no place for me beyond this snow." Behind them, the sheriff mounted his horse again. "If you stay, they'll send more." "I'll be ready," Elias said. Denton's voice softened. "You don't have to carry it alone, Red Hawk." Elias gave a small, sad smile. "I've been carrying it so long it's become part of me." The sheriff looked away, then nudged his horse forward. The remaining rider followed, dragging the body of the fallen man. They disappeared into the pines, their silhouettes fading into the gray dusk. The world went quiet again. Smoke from the rifle still hung in the air, thin and bitter. The smell of gunpowder clung to everything. Marianne turned to Elias, tears streaking her face. "What will you do?" He looked toward the river below, where the ice had finally broken, black water flowing free. "Same thing the river does," he murmured. "Keep moving even with the ash in it." Night crept in, bringing a sharp chill. He doused the lantern, then knelt beside Luke, who had fallen asleep from exhaustion. For a long time he just watched him, the lines of his face softening. Marianne sat beside him, her voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to atone alone." He didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the sleeping boy. After a while he said quietly, "You ever see the river in spring? How it carries last year's fire down to feed new grass?" She nodded faintly. "That's what I want for him. To carry what burned me and make something green of it." Her hand found his, trembling but sure. "Then let me help you." He shook his head. "You already have." The night wind slipped through the cracks, bringing the faint sound of hoofbeats far away, distant but growing. Elias rose slowly, took his rifle, and looked once more at the valley below, lit by the pale shimmer of moonlight on thawing snow. "The storm's coming back," he said, voice steady. Marianne stood, following his gaze. "Then we'll meet it together." He didn't reply. Instead, he stepped into the doorway, the silhouette of his frame against the silver world outside. The wind caught his white hair, and for an instant he looked like something carved from the mountain itself, enduring, solitary, unfinished. From far below, another gunshot echoed through the night. Elias didn't move. He only said, almost to himself, "The past never dies easy." And somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rolled again, not from the sky but from men drawing nearer, carrying with them the judgment he'd been waiting for. Morning came pale and uncertain, the kind of light that belonged more to ghosts than to the living. A thin fog rolled off the thawing ground, swallowing the valley below. The scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air from the night before, sharp and metallic, clinging to wood and cloth alike. Marianne stood at the cabin window, her hand resting on the sill. The world outside seemed fragile, poised between peace and ruin. Elias Redhawk sat by the hearth, cleaning his rifle with slow, methodical movements. His face was calm, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, were far away, tracing memories no one else could see. Luke still slept near the fire, small and peaceful, his hair a tumble of gold against the blanket. Marianne watched the old Apache's hands, steady even now, and felt the ache of knowing this calm was not safety but preparation. "They'll come today," he said quietly, not looking up. She didn't ask how he knew. The silence between them was full of understanding now, too much of it. "Then we run before they reach us," she said. He shook his head once. "Running won't stop what follows. It never has." Her voice cracked. "You don't have to fight again." "I don't fight for myself anymore," he replied, setting the rifle aside. "I fight so you don't have to." Outside, the first crows had gathered on the fence, black flecks against the pale snow. The world seemed to hold its breath. Marianne turned toward Luke, watching him stir beneath the blanket. He was all that mattered, and yet part of her knew she couldn't save him by fleeing, not if the storm waiting beyond the ridge carried Elias's name on its wind. By noon the sound came, hooves, distant but certain, a rhythm like a heartbeat pressed against the earth. The fog shivered. Elias rose, fastening the strap across his chest, and reached for his coat. Marianne moved to him, blocking the door. "If you walk out there," she said, her voice trembling, "you won't come back." He met her gaze, a flicker of something soft in his expression. "Maybe not. But some debts only end one way." Her eyes filled, though she tried to steady them. "You're not a debt. You're what's left of mercy in this place." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Mercy doesn't belong to men like me." Before she could answer, the sound of horses grew louder, closer. Shadows moved through the fog. 6 riders this time, not 3. She recognized the silhouette of Sheriff Denton among them. He dismounted, shouting into the mist. "Redhawk, you know why we're here." Elias opened the door and stepped outside, the cold rushing in behind him like breath. Marianne followed to the threshold, her hand on the frame, heart pounding. The snow beneath her feet was wet, dark with meltwater. Denton stood 20 paces away, his coat open, revolver holstered but ready. The men behind him fanned out, rifles raised. "You killed one of mine," Denton said. "Now the territory wants blood." Elias's voice carried clear, calm. "You already took enough of it." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You think redemption's earned in a cabin? You can't wash away what happened at Yuma." "I'm not trying to," Elias said. "I'm trying to leave something behind that isn't made of graves." For a long moment, the two men simply stared at each other, two ghosts from the same dying world. The fog swirled between them like smoke from an unseen fire. Then one of the riders shifted nervously, his hand twitching toward the trigger. The sound that followed split the air, a single gunshot, sharp and bright. The bullet tore through the fog, striking the porch beam beside Marianne. She gasped, ducking as splinters rained. Elias moved faster than thought. His rifle roared once, dropping the man who had fired. The others scattered for cover, shouting. The quiet valley erupted into chaos. "Get Luke inside." Elias barked, reloading. Marianne ran for the hearth, shaking the boy awake. "Luke, listen, hide now." She pushed him toward the back room, her hands trembling. Outside, another volley rang out. Elias fired again, the echoes slamming against the hills. Denton shouted for his men to hold their line, but fear had already scattered them. One fell, another bolted into the trees. Elias stepped forward into the open, smoke curling from the barrel of his rifle. "Enough," he roared. "No more dying for the dead." The sheriff emerged from the fog, revolver drawn, eyes wild. "You think you decide that?" he shouted. "You don't get to rewrite the ending." A shot cracked between them. Elias's shoulder jerked back. He staggered, dropping to one knee, breath catching in his chest. Marianne screamed his name, running to him, but he held out a hand. "Stay back." Blood spread across his coat, dark against the snow. Denton stood, gun trembling in his grip. The rest of his men had vanished into the trees. The world had narrowed to two figures in the fog and the woman who refused to run. "Don't make me do this," the sheriff said, his voice breaking. Elias forced himself upright, his rifle slipping from his hand. "You already did," he whispered. He took a single step forward. Denton's arm shook. For a heartbeat, the valley held its breath. Then a shot cracked, but not from Denton. Marianne stood in the doorway, her hands on the sheriff's dropped revolver, smoke curling from the barrel. Denton staggered, clutching his side, eyes wide with shock. His gun fell into the snow. He looked at her, something like understanding dawning behind the pain. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "I won't let you take him," she said, voice steady despite the tears streaking her face. He sank to his knees, breath shallow. Elias stumbled toward him, catching him before he hit the ground. For a moment they looked like brothers caught on opposite sides of the same storm. "I didn't come for revenge," Denton whispered. "I came to stop it." Elias nodded, grief carving through his expression. "Then it's done." The sheriff's eyes closed, the fog swallowing his final breath. Silence settled heavy as the snow. Marianne dropped the gun, her hands trembling. Luke ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face against her coat. Elias knelt beside Denton's body, head bowed. When he rose, blood soaked his sleeve, but his eyes held a strange peace. "It's over," he said softly. Marianne shook her head. "You're bleeding. We have to." He caught her hand, his grip gentle but firm. "No. Listen." He looked out toward the valley, where sunlight had begun to pierce the fog, streaking gold across the white hills. For the first time in years, the river runs clear. Tears blurred her vision. "You're talking like you're leaving." "I already stayed longer than I deserved." "Don't say that," she begged. He smiled faintly. "I told you the weather never breaks here, it just changes its shape. Maybe now it's finally changing for good." His knees gave out and she caught him as he fell. The weight of him was heavy, grounding, like the earth itself had leaned into her arms. "Elias," she whispered. "Stay with me." He opened his eyes one last time, and for a heartbeat the years fell away, the soldier, the outcast, the ghost. All that remained was the man who had found a reason to believe again. "You and the boy," he murmured. "Don't hide from the thaw. Let it find you." Then his hand slipped from hers, his breath fading into the wind. The fog began to lift. The snow, touched by sunlight, shimmered like glass. Marianne held him, her tears falling onto his coat, mixing with blood and melting frost. Luke knelt beside her, small hands clutching hers. Together they sat in the hush that follows violence, the kind of silence that carries the weight of both loss and grace. Later, she buried him near the riverbank where the thawed water whispered through stones. She marked the grave with his knife, its handle carved with a small sun. When the wind rose, she swore she could hear him in it, low, steady, like a prayer meant for those who still had miles left to walk. By evening the valley glowed gold. Luke stood beside her, looking down at the river. "Will we stay here, Ma?" he asked. She looked at the cabin, at the smoke curling from its chimney, at the mountains beyond. "For a while," she said. "He'd want us to." The boy nodded, slipping his hand into hers. As they turned toward home, a single hawk circled above, wings catching the light. Marianne watched it rise higher until it vanished into the sky's widening blue. The air felt different now, warmer, forgiving, alive. And in that stillness she thought she heard his voice again, softer this time, carried by wind and memory. "The river always finds its way home." She closed her eyes, letting the sound wrap around her, a promise kept in silence, and when she opened them, the snow had begun to fall again. Light and slow, not cruel this time but kind, as if the world itself had finally remembered how to begin anew.